The mess hall of the Unbroken Reach smelled like hot metal and something that the Crethely soldiers called food, but looked like wet gravel pressed into flat squares. The room was loud. It was always loud when General Vraxdun was in it. He stood at the far end of the long steel table, broad shoulders back, the 4 silver bars on his collar catching the overhead light. He was tall, even for Crethely. His voice carried without effort. He was the kind of being who filled a room not just with his body, but with the sound of his own certainty. Across the table, alien officers from 6 different species shifted in their seats when he spoke. A pair of Orvathai navigators sat stiffly upright. 2 Bryn infantry commanders leaned forward, nodding at everything. A logistics officer named Breck sat at the middle of the table with his arms crossed. Not nodding, not smiling, just listening with the flat expression of someone who had seen too many missions to be impressed by a loud voice. At the far end of the table, near the mess counter, sat Sergeant Rinholt. He was not tall. He was not broad. He wore a standard-issue gray field jacket with no decorations on it except a small patch on the left shoulder. A blue circle with a single white line through it, the mark of Earth's liaison corps. He had a dented metal cup in his right hand and a paper field manual open in his left. The manual was old. The pages had been folded and unfolded so many times that the corners were soft. He was reading, not pretending to read. Actually reading. His eyes moved line by line down the page. He turned the page with his thumb. He took a slow sip from the cup. Vraxdun had been speaking for 4 minutes about the upcoming patrol into the contested Drev border zone. He had been loud for all 4 of those minutes. He had used the word dominance 6 times. He paused mid-sentence when his eyes landed on the human at the end of the table. He stared. Holt turned another page. Vraxdun let the silence stretch. Around the table, officers looked between the general and the human. The Orvathai navigator Saya, young and sharp-eyed, looked at Holt and then at the general and felt something tighten in her chest that she could not name. "You," Vraxdun said. Holt looked up. He did not look startled. He did not look nervous. He looked like someone who had just been asked a minor question while doing something else. "You are the human liaison," Vraxdun said. "Yes," Holt said. "You are reading." "Yes, I am speaking." Holt looked at the manual, then back at Vraxdun. "You were speaking about patrol formation in a Drev zone. I've read the updated field notes on Drev swarm patterns. I was reviewing them." A few officers shifted in their seats. One of the Bryn commanders made a low sound. Vraxdun's jaw tightened. Among the Crethely, you did not read when a general spoke. You stood. You gave full attention. You showed that his words filled your entire world. This human had done none of those things. "On Crethol," Vraxdun said, his voice dropping to the kind of low that was more dangerous than loud. "When a soldier does not look at the general, it means one of 2 things. The soldier is too important to care, or the soldier is too stupid to understand what is happening in front of him." He let the words land. Around the table, no one moved. "Which one are you?" Vraxdun asked. Rinholt set the manual down on the table. He placed it face down so he would not lose his page. He folded his hands around his cup. He looked at Vraxdun with an expression that was not angry and not afraid and not amused. It was simply level, like still water. "Neither," he said. Vraxdun smiled, but it was not a warm smile. "Then explain yourself." "I read when there is something worth reading," Holt said. "I listen when there is something worth hearing." "You were repeating the standard patrol brief." "I already have it. The field notes on Drev movement have 3 updates since the standard brief was written. I was reading those." He paused. "If you said something new, I would have listened." The room was absolutely still. Vraxdun looked at this small, quiet human in his plain jacket with his old manual and his dented cup, and he felt something he was not used to feeling. He was not sure what it was. It was not respect. It was closer to the feeling you got when you reached for something, and it was not where you expected it to be. He decided to end this cleanly. "The forward unit deploys to Sector Drev, 7 in 18 hours, he said. "You were assigned to it." Sector Drev, 7 was the closest point to the radar line. Everyone at the table knew it. It was not an assignment. It was a message. Holt looked at Vraxdun for a moment. Then he picked up his cup, turned in his seat, and looked toward the mess counter. "Excuse me," he said to the mess officer. "Is there any more coffee?" The mess officer, a short brin with wide eyes, looked from the human to the general and back again. Then he quietly refilled the cup. Holt turned back, picked up his manual, and found his page. Vraxdun walked out. Saya sat very still, watching the human read, and thought about still water and how it was always the deepest kind. Sector Drev 7 did not look dangerous from above, from the shuttle's small side window. The colony station looked like a gray disk pressed against a dark rock face, its outer lights still blinking in slow, patient rhythm. It looked like a place where people lived and worked and argued about small things. It did not look like a place where something had gone very wrong. Then the shuttle dropped through the upper dock and the smell hit them. Burnt wiring, ruptured coolant lines, and something underneath it all that had no name, but that every soldier in every unit across every world recognized without being told. The smell of a fight that had not finished. The forward unit moved in 2 columns through the main corridor. 12 soldiers, 7 different species. Holt walked near the back, his rifle across his chest, his boots finding the floor with the same flat, unhurried step he used everywhere. Saya was at the rear, a small comm unit on her back, a sidearm at her hip that she clearly hoped she would not have to use the front. The unit commander, a Bren named Doss, held up a fist. The column stopped. From somewhere deep in the station, sound came rolling toward them. Not an explosion, not a weapon discharge. Something worse. A low, overlapping chitter, sharp and layered, and coming from multiple directions at once. "What is that?" one of the Orvathai soldiers whispered. Holt already knew. He had heard recordings of it in training. Not many soldiers in the Coalition had, because the training files on Drev swarm behavior were only recently shared with liaison units. Most Coalition forces had never encountered a full Drev swarm in an enclosed space, but he had spent 3 weeks studying those files. "They're moving in a spiral pattern," he said quietly. "They start wide and pull inward. If we stay in a straight column, they will hit us from the sides before the front unit even sees them." Doss turned and looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because they already passed through here once," Holt said, and pointed at the walls. There were small marks at regular intervals, scratches low and high, in a diagonal pattern. They leave position markers. It's how the swarm shares location without sound. Doss stared at the marks on the wall. He had walked past them without seeing them. "What do we do?" Saya asked. She was not asking Doss. She was looking at Holt. "We stop being a column," Holt said. He moved to Doss. "Split them into 4 groups of 3. Cover the corners at the next junction. Drev swarms collapse when you break their encirclement. They are built to surround, not to punch through." Doss looked at this quiet human in the plain jacket for 1 long second. Then he gave the order. The unit broke into groups and moved to the junction. They had 40 seconds before the chitter became sound they could hear without straining. Then the Drev came. They were not large individually. Each one was roughly the size of a grown human, gray-plated, fast, with 4 limbs that moved in wrong directions. They came from 3 corridors at once, exactly as Holt said they would, moving in a tight, overlapping wave designed to fold inward and crush whatever was in the middle. But there was nothing in the middle. The 4 corner groups opened fire simultaneously. The Drev's encirclement had no center to collapse on. The swarm broke into 2 confused halves, and the unit drove through the gap before they could reform. It lasted 40 seconds. When it was over, 12 soldiers stood in the junction. None of them were down. 2 had minor hits from glancing contact. 1 Bren soldier was breathing very fast and staring at the place where a Drev had nearly taken his arm. Saya leaned against the corridor wall and looked at Holt. "You knew exactly what they were going to do." "I read the pattern," he said. He was already reloading with the calm, step-by-step motion of someone doing something they had done 10,000 times. They always do the same thing. Once you know it, it stops being scary and starts being a problem with a solution. Why didn't the briefing include any of this? "Because most briefing officers haven't read the updated files," he said. He checked his rifle, locked it, and looked down the next corridor. Then, in the distance, the chitter sound came again. But this time it was different. Lower. Slower. Saya recognized what that change meant a moment before Holt said it. "They're calling the rest of the swarm," he said quietly. This was the scout unit. From somewhere behind the corridor wall, through the steel and the dark, something much louder was beginning to move. "DOS," Holt said without urgency. "We need a choke point. Third junction back has a narrowing. Get everyone there." He was already walking. Not running. Walking. Behind him, the unit followed without being asked twice. Saya looked back once at the corridor the Drev had come from. The lights were still blinking in slow, patient rhythm. Then she turned and followed the human. The third junction back was exactly what Holt said it would be. The corridor pinched to half its width at a structural support frame. An old one, riveted and bolted rather than welded, the kind of construction that meant the station had been built in pieces by different contractors who did not always agree. The narrowing was not elegant. It was barely enough for two soldiers to stand side by side. But it was enough. DOS positioned the unit in a tight layered line. The Orvithai pair in the back with their long-range carbines. The Bryn soldiers up front with the heavier plating on their gear. Holt stood at the edge of the choke point, his back to a support strut, watching the far end of the corridor with the unhurried attention of someone waiting for ABUS. IT was quiet for 11 minutes. Saya used those 11 minutes to check her comm unit, confirm the channel was still live back to the unbroken reach, and then sit down on the floor next to the support strut because her legs were telling her something her training said to ignore. She looked up at Holt, standing above her. "Can I ask you something?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Go ahead," he said. He did not look away from the corridor. "You don't react the way we do," she said. "When the Drev came, you moved. Like there was no fear." "There was fear," he said. She looked at him. His face was the same as it always was. "Still, you didn't show it," she said. "Showing it doesn't help anything," he said. "On Earth, the things that wanted to eat us didn't stop because we were scared. So we learned to be scared and keep moving at the same time. You do it long enough and it becomes normal. Things that wanted to eat you," Saya said slowly. "On your own planet, we had no armor," he said. "No natural weapons worth anything. We were not the fastest animal on the ground. We were not the strongest. We got sick easily. We broke bones. We bled from small things." He paused. "We survived anyway. We survived everything. Long enough to build ships and leave." Saya thought about that. The Orvithai home world was cold and difficult, but its dangers were geological, not biological. She had never had to think about something wanting to eat her. "So the quiet," she said. "That is a weapon." "It is a result," he said. "When you are afraid for long enough, you stop spending energy on showing the fear. You save it. You put it somewhere useful." He glanced down at her for a moment. "Your hands are shaking." She looked at them. They were. "That is not a problem," he said. "Shaking hands means your body is paying attention. The problem is soldiers who stop shaking because they have stopped caring." She closed her hands and opened them again. "How do you prepare? But for something like this?" "The same way every time," he said. "Check your gear in order. Don't skip steps. Check again. Know your route. Know your fallback. Know your partner's name." He said it without looking at her. "Your name is Saya. You carry a short-range comm unit, and you're better at reading terrain than you think you are. I noticed at the first junction. You saw the exit before DOS did." She blinked. She had not realized she had done that. Across the junction, Breck, who had said almost nothing since they deployed, was sitting against the opposite wall. He was pretending to check his weapon, but his head was angled slightly toward Holt. He was listening, Holt noticed. He said nothing about it. 10 minutes later, the second wave came. It was larger than the first. Much larger. The chitter filled the whole corridor before the first Drev even appeared at the far end, and the sound of it made two of the Bren soldiers step back involuntarily. The shapes in the corridor were not countable by looking. They moved like one thing with many parts, but the choke point held. Two soldiers could not fit through side by side, which meant the Drev could not swarm. Their numbers meant nothing. They funneled in one at a time, and the unit cut through them in steady, controlled bursts. It was not a battle. After the first minute, it became a problem with a solution. Exactly as Holt had said, IT lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, the corridor floor was covered in gray-plated shapes that were no longer moving. The unit was intact. One Orvithai had a burned arm from a Drev energy contact. She was still standing. DOS was breathing hard. He looked at the corridor, then at Holt. How did you know the choke point would work? He asked. Drev are built for open space, Holt said. Tight corridors are the one terrain type that removes their advantage. It is in the field notes. He looked at the burned Orvathai. Saya, get a field dressing on her arm. Saya was already moving. And then Holt's comm channel clicked. Not the unit channel, his personal channel. He stepped slightly to the side and answered it quietly that IT was one word from an intelligence contact on the ship. He stood still for a moment after the channel closed. Then he turned back to DOS. The Drev are pulling back, he said, but not retreating. They were sent here. Someone hired them. He looked at the ceiling, where the station's data core was 2 levels up. And whoever hired them, they were after something specific. Breck, across the room, had stopped pretending to check his weapon, that he was watching the human with an expression that was not quite his usual flat dismissal. IT was something less certain than that. The footage from the colony station played on a screen that took up most of the Unbroken Reach's debrief wall. General Vrax Dunn stood in front of it with his arms crossed. The room behind him held 7 senior officers, a coalition intelligence rep named Oru, and one empty chair at the far end where the human liaison had not yet arrived. The footage showed the choke point defense. It showed 12 soldiers holding a narrow corridor against a second-wave Drev swarm for 9 minutes without losing a single unit. It showed the tactical split at the main junction. It showed who had suggested both. Vrax Dunn watched it twice without speaking. When the door opened and Run Holt walked in, he was moving slightly slower than usual. His left side was wrapped under his jacket. His face showed nothing about it. He sat in the empty chair, set his field manual on the table, and looked at the screen where the footage had just ended. You are late, Vrax Dunn said. Medical hold, Holt said. Cleared 20 minutes ago. You were injured in the field. Yes. You did not report it during the operation. It did not change the operation, Holt said. Vrax Dunn looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned back to the screen and began the debrief that he described the operation in clean terms. Tactical adjustment to terrain. Effective use of choke geometry. Team coordination under pressure. He attributed none of it specifically to anyone. He spoke about the forward unit as a collective. He used words like combined response and unit instinct. The intelligence rep Oru, who had reviewed the helmet footage in detail, glanced at Holt once. Holt was looking at his field manual. After the formal debrief, Oru leaned across the table and said quietly, "The tactical calls came from you. The unit executed them," Holt said. "You don't want the credit." Holt looked up from the manual. "Credit does not help me prepare for the next one." Oru looked at him for a moment. Then he wrote something in his notes. After the room cleared, Breck lingered near the door. Saya was still in her seat, compiling her comm logs. Breck glanced at Holt and then away. He was not a being who spoke without reason. He stood there for 11 seconds and then said quietly to no one in particular the choke call was the right call. He left before anyone could respond. Saya watched the door close and then looked at Holt. That's as close to a compliment as Breck gives. I know, Holt said that I in the ship's medical bay. An alien medic named OSU was filing a report that she was not sure how to write. The human's wound, a burn from a Drev contact strike, deeper than Holt had indicated on the comm, had been treated without issue. What she did not know how to file was the part where Holt had sat through the initial examination without any visible sign of the pain level that the sensor readings confirmed he was experiencing. She had asked him about it. Humans have a high tolerance, he had said. That is not a medical explanation, she had told him. We come from a place where stopping because something hurts was often not an option, he had said. So we learn to feel it fully and keep going. It still hurts. We just don't give it authority. She had written down his exact words and then stared at them for a while before moving on to the next section of the form. That evening, Holt sat in the small communications alcove off the main corridor and opened his encrypted channel. The signal took 12 seconds to connect. Captain Dara Wells appeared on the small screen. She was at her desk. It was clearly early morning on her end. She looked at him the way people looked at someone when they already knew the broad shape of what had happened and were deciding how to feel about it. I read the field report, she said. It was a standard Drev contact, he said. The report says 140 Drev in the second wave. The choke geometry made the number irrelevant. She looked at him for a moment. Are you hurt? A small pause. Minor burn. Treated. Pain. Another pause. It is handled. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm proud of you. She said it plainly, the way people say things they mean and have thought about. Get some sleep. The channel closed. Holt sat in the alcove for a while. The ship hummed around him. Through the narrow viewport above the comm station, the stars were still and cold and very far away. His comm unit buzzed. Not his personal channel, the ship's intelligence channel. A short message from ORU.IT read. Data core analysis complete. The Drev were not after supplies or personnel. They were after the location files for human deep space settlements. All of them. Someone wanted to know exactly where your people are. Holt read it once. He did not stand up quickly. He did not make a sound. He read it a second time, folded the unit closed, and sat with the information the way you sit with something heavy, not fighting its weight, just letting it settle until you understand the shape of it. Then he stood up, walked to the mess counter, and asked for a cup of coffee and a station map. He got both that. He sat down and began to read. 3 days after the colony station, the classified planning room on the unbroken reach smelled like recycled air, and argument point 6 senior officers stood around a circular table covered in star maps, faction charts, and data printouts. Braxton was at the center of it, as always. The intelligence rep, Oru, sat to his left, looking like a being who had not slept in some time. Breck stood near the wall. Saya was not present. She was on shift in the navigation bay. Holt was at the far end of the table that he had been invited. Not warmly. Braxton had walked into the mess hall that morning, stood near the counter without looking directly at Holt, and said, "The planning room. 1 hour." Then he had walked away. Holt had finished his coffee first. Now the argument in the room was about who to send to intercept the information broker. Oru had traced the Drev contract back 3 steps. The Drev had been hired by a broker operating from a neutral way station called Parett 9. Parett 9 was small, crowded, and specifically designed to be a place where people who did not want to be found could avoid being found. No coalition military presence was allowed on the station. The station's own security asked no questions as long as no one fired weapons in the open. Getting inside, finding the broker, and pulling the buyer's name from their records required something the military planning of 6 senior officers kept colliding with. You could not go in loud. We send a Brin infiltration team, one of the officers said. 3 units, civilian cover. The broker will have surveillance on every entry point, Oru said. 3 Brin soldiers moving together will be flagged in under an hour. Then 1 unit, someone else said. 1 Brin soldier walking into a neutral information station with no cover story and no contacts, Oru said flatly, is the same problem at smaller scale. The argument went in circles for 20 minutes. Holt sat quietly and let it circle. When there was a natural pause, the kind that happens when everyone has said their version of the same thing twice and the room runs out of momentum, he placed a single sheet of paper on the table that IT was not a printout. It was handwritten. His handwriting was small and very evened out. On it was a layout of Parett 9. Entry points marked. Surveillance camera positions noted. The broker's known operating area circled. 2 routes drawn in pencil from the entry to the broker's location. A small notation at the bottom listing 3 cover identities that would be credible for a single traveler arriving alone. He had drawn it from the station's public commercial registry and cross-referenced it with 3 old field reports from coalition observers who had passed through Parett 9 in the last 4 years. Everyone at the table looked at the paper. Braxton looked at it the longest. You prepared this before this meeting, he said. 2 days ago, Holt said. You assumed you would be brought in. I assumed the problem would still be unsolved, Holt said, and that eventually someone would need a plan. Braxton said nothing. 1 person, Holt said, traveling alone. Human travelers use Parett 9 occasionally for resupply. A single human on the station will not draw attention. I can carry a passive data reader that will pull the broker's transaction files from within 4 meters. I do not need to interact with them directly. And if you are identified, one of the officers asked. I won't be, he said. Not arrogance. Just the same level tone he used for everything. The broker deals in alien faction intelligence. A human liaison officer is not on their threat list. I am too small to be interesting to them. You want to use your own irrelevance as cover, Oru said. Yes, Holt said. Oru almost smiled. Vraxdun looked at the paper for another long moment. Then he said, "You will take a comm support. I would like Saya," Holt said. Vraxdun's jaw moved slightly. "She is a navigator. She is calm under pressure," Holt said. "And she reads terrain well. I would rather have someone steady than someone trained and loud." Saya, when she was told, spent approximately 45 seconds being quietly terrified and then packed her gear. Parett, 9 looked exactly like the handwritten map, said it was layered and tight, levels stacked on levels, corridors that turned unexpectedly, merchant stalls pressed between unmarked doors. Everything smelled like fuel and fried food, and the particular kind of noise that happens when 20 different species try to do business in the same small space. Holt walked through it at the pace of someone who had been there before and was not in a hurry. Saya followed, comm unit in her bag, earpiece in, moving in the way he had told her. "Don't look at the cameras, don't look at the doors, look at the stalls like you're considering buying something." She looked at the stalls. She considered nothing. Her heartbeat was very loud in her own ears. "Broker is 2 levels down," Holt said quietly. "Northeast corner." He did not walk there directly. He stopped at a food stall. He bought something that he did not eat. He moved sideways through a crowd. He paused at a public information terminal for 30 seconds. When he finally passed within 4 meters of the broker's office door, his hand was in his jacket pocket. He did not slow down. He did not look at the door. He kept walking. "Done," he said, very quietly. Saya exhaled so hard that a nearby merchant looked at her on the way back to the shuttle. She said, "That is all it took?" "That is all it took," he said. "We just walked past the door." "The preparation was the hard part," he said. "The walking was just walking." Back on the unbroken reach, Oru plugged in the data reader and was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up. "The buyer's name is in here," he said. He read it. His expression changed. "This name is connected to 3 previous incidents. Human vessels, all listed as accidents." He looked at Holt. "This has been running for 2 years." Holt was already at the table with the star map. "Then we have everything we need," he said. It was not a dramatic morning, no alarms, no emergency lights. The unbroken reach sat in slow drift between 2 relay points while its crew ran standard shift rotations. From the outside, it looked like any other coalition warship doing nothing in particular in a quiet corner of space. Inside, in a communications alcove 3 corridors from the command bridge, Rinholt was organizing a folder. He had been working on it for 11 days. Not continuously, in the gaps, between shifts, during the meal hours when the mess hall was nearly empty, in the 20 minutes before lights out when most of the ship had gone quiet. He had built it piece by piece from publicly available coalition registry data, cross-referenced field reports, the transaction files pulled from Parett, 9, and 3 older incident reports that everyone had agreed were accidents. The folder was not long. It did not need to be long. Every page said exactly one thing and then stopped. He had written it in plain language. No military phrasing. No technical terms that require translation. The kind of writing where you could not misunderstand a sentence even if you tried it. T0600 ship time. He requested a live channel to the Coalition Oversight Council through the ship's primary broadcast system. It was the kind of request that required senior authorization. He had submitted it 4 days earlier through proper channels with a 1-line subject header. Evidence review, human settlement location breach, 2 years of incidents. Oru had co-signed it. The council accepted the channel. Vraxdun was on the command bridge when the broadcast opened. He had not been told the full shape of what Holt had built. He had known something was coming. Holt had been quiet in a different way the last few days, the kind of quiet that had direction, but he had not seen the folder. He watched the broadcast feed from the bridge screen. Holt sat in front of the camera in his plain gray jacket. He did not have notes in front of him. He had the folder closed on the table beside him. He spoke from memory. He started with the first incident. A human cargo vessel listed as lost due to navigation failure 18 months ago. He gave the vessel's name, its last recorded position, and the buyer's transaction record showing a payment made 4 days before the vessel disappeared, a payment to a faction that operated in exactly that region that he moved to the second. Then the third. Each one took about 2 minutes. He did not editorialize. He did not say words like criminal or attack or murder. He just described what happened and then described what the record showed and let the distance between those two things sit in the air that on the bridge, Vrax Dunn stood with his arms at his sides instead of crossed. When Holt reached the colony station, the Drev contract, the data core, the settlement location files, he connected it to the same buyer with 3 separate evidence threads. Transaction record. Communication log fragment. A second payment, made the day after the Drev were deployed, to a routing address that matched the buyer's known financial network. The council was quiet throughout. When Holt finished, he opened the folder and held it up to the camera. Physical documentation submitted to the council registry under file number 7, Reach 119. All sources listed and verifiable independently. He set it down. That is everything. One council member began speaking immediately. A sharp, clipped voice that started with the evidence chain requires formal review before any. Holt reached into the folder and produced a single additional page. That objection is addressed on page 14, he said. The formal review pathway under Coalition Charter Article 31C allows for provisional hold on the named party pending review. The evidence threshold for that hold is met by items 3, 7, and 9 alone. The sharp voice stopped. Another council member asked about the settlement location files, whether the breach had been contained. Captain Wells of Earth Liaison Command initiated rerouting of all listed coordinates 48 hours ago, Holt said, when I forwarded her the preliminary findings. He had done that quietly, without announcement, 6 days ago. There was a long pause from the council. Then the formal acknowledgement came through. Provisional hold issued. Full review scheduled. All connected incidents reclassified pending investigation. The channel closed. The communications alcove was very quiet. Holt sat back in his chair. He looked at the folder on the table. Then he looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way people do when they have been carrying something for a long time and have just set it down on the bridge. Vrax Dunn stood still for a long time after the screen went dark. He thought about the mess hall. The human at the far end of the table, reading. The dented cup. The answer that was not angry and not afraid. He thought about the colony station footage. The choke point. The 9 minutes that he thought about a being who had spent 11 days building a case in the gaps between everything else, wounded, unrecognized, assigned to the most dangerous unit as an insult, and had done it anyway. Without complaint, without performance, without asking anyone to notice, he walked off the bridge. He walked down the corridor. He walked into the mess hall. He poured a cup of coffee from the counter. He walked to the far end of the table and set it down in an empty seat where Holt usually Saturday. Then he went back to his post. When Holt came into the mess hall 20 minutes later, Saya was already there. She watched him find the cup. He looked at it. He looked around the room. He sat down and picked it up. He took a slow sip. "Little cold," he said, "but it'll do." Saya smiled. Outside the viewport, the stars moved in their slow, patient way, going where they had always been going, steady and quiet and very, very old.